And thank you all for being with us and for joining us here as we get together every 2 weeks in this way to try to look deeply into some of the essential issues that are related to this amazing kind of transition that we're all experiencing, going from kind of one world to another one. But in any case, we start by running around the circle here and talking about what's been on your mind for a while. And so, Penny, start us out. What have you been thinking about?
I think, one thing over and over and over, it's that I can feel a buildup of tension, like a rubber band that just keeps getting stretched further and further, and I just am concerned that that is going to snap.
I saw an interview, a really interesting interview with a former member of British Parliament. His name's Tony Benn. And after he left Parliament, only then he could talk about the perspective of controlling populations. And he said the way that a population is controlled is by frightening them and demoralizing them. The further dividing of social alliances by focusing on race. And the way the media has reported two incidences, people were killed. It's horrible. People were killed in both. But the way the media reported it, in one, they focused on the fact, on race. It was all about color. And what that has done, and it's even done it in my community, is people are very angry, and they've taken sides based upon race, not the fact that people died.
The thing that I've been impressed with is the control, as you suggest, and on the system that is manifesting itself. And it manifests itself in places like Australia, where in the Northern Territories, again, where nobody's sick, but they are rounding people up and they are putting them in concentration camps. Governor of New York is locking down this whole state, even though there are no tests, nobody has got it. The thing that I'm wondering about is, what is the system that got put in place? What is the process that got put in place? Where otherwise what one could assume, are intelligent people are so controlled, so influenced that they become essentially irrational.
You see, you cannot kind of externalize a threat if it's not named or categorized. We know that from the war on terror, etc. So very quickly they called it Omicron, which is it sounds like some kind of some dark emperor from Star Wars, Emperor Omicron. I sense there's a process of continual traumatization going on, and if you listen to psychology, the psychologists say that there's to gather mass formation or a mass crowd psychology, you tend to need 3 or 4 factors to be able to create this crowd kind of hypnosis psychology. So in the build up to what's happening now, we've had all those aspects. We've had a lack of social bonds, especially in the beginning of what's happening with the social distancing. And we've had a kind of free-floating anxiety where people have been restless and not knowing what to kind of identify with that restlessness. And now we're having all these named threats that people are, I think, transferring their trauma or anxiety onto. And then that gets continued, You get a period of stability and then another identified threat. And so the trauma becomes hypnotized and kept in place and sustained.
So let's go to our topic of the day. We started last week by talking about disclosure and what the implications in the disclosure might be. And today what we want to talk about is how does it change humans? How does it change us as humans? Not as society and such, although that's certainly a downstream kind of aspect of it. But how do we see ourselves in a different way? How does it change who we understand ourselves to be? How does it expose kind of capabilities and other things that suddenly makes everybody kind of see not only themselves but the possibilities and other such things in quite different ways, and becomes literally, among other things, the seed ideas and the seed kind of stock for the emergent new world.
I'll just share what happened with me when I came back. I was aware that this ship was at least 5 miles in terms of our size, wide or big, or 5 miles in diameter. What becomes clear when you're on the big ship is the absence of waste, total absence of waste of any sort. There's no wasted space. There's no waste material or matter. There's an attitude of congeniality that pervades the people. It's a kind of a business-like congeniality. And you come back here and you look at what we have done and how people are struggling to get more stuff. And when you're on board the ship, nobody needs any of that stuff. And that, I think, is one of the biggest changes that I noticed right off the bat. Other things, that I went through that I think people would go through would be fear, because they've been programmed by movies and books. There's a lot of stuff that we take on mentally, emotionally, and spiritually that we never examine. The other thing is the consciousness of the people on board the ship. There's no comparison. They can do things with consciousness that made me feel like I was 18 months old again. Like, how are they doing that? How do they make that happen? Why, so when you delve into that, what you discover is that all of their assumptions and all of their principles, operating principles, are very, very well developed, and we are still back in the Stone Age. And so things appear and disappear as you need them. Things just appear and disappear, and there's a sense that is now my definition of abundance. It's the ability to produce what you need when you need it.
My sense is that we are going to be rewired, literally, as a species by the interaction. When we're talking about disclosure, we're talking about interaction, and principally we're talking about communication. The question is, will that occur at a time when we're ready, or will it occur as a process to accelerate our preparedness and readiness? Now, for example, we know just from our own science of neuroplasticity and of mirror neurons that when we're in the presence of other people, that just being in interaction with them can rewire our neuroprocesses, our new pathways. Now imagine that if we're in the presence of a much more advanced sentient species, their consciousness field could be entraining our vibrational consciousness field. And also, just by our interaction of communication, however that will work, could actually be creating new pathways in our brains. So, and in fact, let's take an analogy of a kind of a wounding. When we have a big shock, the body's wounded and the brain is scrambled, and new pathways have to be made to relearn. I'm going to sense that just by this shock of exposure to the sentient species, they will create new pathways in the human nervous system and the human brain that will trigger so far latent evolutionary perceptive capacities within the human being that will then jump us up to a higher niche.
The bottom line for me is that however disclosure appears, it's going to change our story, the way we've been taught to think about ourselves. We're the product of 150 years of indoctrination into thinking that we live in a dead universe of inert material, and that we are the product of random mutations and lucky biology. The very existence of these beings tells us that thinking is no longer supported by the evidence. Our personal filters of upbringing will determine how we perceive that, what that change means. Our religious, certainly religious trainings, the way that we think about ourselves in society. But what's really interesting to me, John, we began this by talking about the fear that's being used to control populations that's only possible when we feel separate from one another and when our social alliances are divided. And I think disclosure holds a very real potential of being one of the most unifying experiences of the entire human species in 5,000 years of recorded human history. I think you're right on. Being in the presence of this consciousness field will awaken the latent and the dormant potentials. It has to, because I've seen this happen in a boardroom where everyone comes in angry, thinking that something's not going to work, and one person shows that there's a potential for another way of thinking, and all of a sudden the whole boardroom, within just a few minutes, begins to think very differently. So if we extrapolate that phenomenon into a global level of what this disclosure can mean for us, I think it can trigger, catapult us into an evolutionary leap in terms of not only how we perceive ourselves, but how much of our potential we're willing to awaken and embrace.
Absolutely agree with you, of course, that it is a catapulting kind of element or process that just puts you off into a whole different kind of new space. The way I look at it is that through this process, you systematically have all of the underpinnings of who we are, who we believe that we are, who we've been taught that we are, systematically get disconnected. You clearly find out that history is not the way you thought it would be. I mean, doesn't take you very long when you're starting to have meaningful, broad-based kind of conversations with groups that have been around for millions of years, to figure out that your perspective and what you've been taught is so minuscule compared to the whole thing.
When you get introduced to somebody, for a split second, you project to become that individual. And as soon as you do that, as soon as you project and become that individual, that's when that rewiring happens. You come back to yourself instantly, but you bring back some of the formations and communications within that body that you just projected into and left. And that same thing happens, of course, when you meet people from elsewhere and you tune into them or you become them for a second. The change that occurs when you come back to yourself might be fainting. You might wet your pants. You might just freak out altogether because there's too many changes, too many upgrades that happen in that split second. And so the rewiring process is very, very real.
The new technologies that are being touted as the future, and especially for young people, implanted, chips, for example, implanted into the human brain. That's one example. When the body feels like there's no longer a need for those cells, they begin to atrophy. So if the computer chips are taking over the role that the mirror neurons, for example, would take over, in one generation we stop using them. The next generation, the body says, hey, we don't need those anymore, and they begin to atrophy. Then we are not able to have that empathetic response and learn quickly, change those boundaries, and think differently about ourselves.
One of the things that happened just as this whole recent 2 years began was a visit from my people, and they said, don't get the shot. And I said, why? And they said, look at us. This is what happens. And took me a while before the implications of all of that sunk in. And I thought, that's why they look the way they do. That's why they're shaped the way they are. That's why they operate the way that they do. And they are in love with the technology because that's part of their survival mechanism. And they are in love with our our incredible resilience. That's what they like about us. Is look at the crap those people are doing to themselves, and they're still alive.
The bottom line is anything which is genuine brings us back to ourselves.
Yeah.
Anything which is disingenuous takes us out of ourselves.
Right.
And therefore, I think the way we frame this as the extraterrestrial question, take us out of ourselves. Oh, they're out there. They are something other. The whole framing is kind of taken away from us. But really, the question is a unifying question. It's a human question. We are them and they are us. We're just different manifestations of the same source, but in different ways.
Yeah, I think your point about anti-life is kind of central here in terms of the major kind of divergence and the progression that is going on in that all of the kind of implications and efforts and direction probably of the development of technology and its controlling and so on are essentially, from my point of view, constraining the evolutionary push of the species.
We've been talking about how the outer society, etc., will change, but if we switch it around, perhaps my sense is that the initial change will come within us. It will actually, as we're saying, rewire us. Once we are changed, we then manifest a different reality. We will want a different reorganization of human life.
Yeah, that might be encouraged, by the way, through these waves of energy coming out of the center of the galaxy and different kind of energetic kind of cosmic forces coming out of the sun, and for instance, that are changing kind of the genetic or the essential kind of character of the humans. So, I mean, it's a combination of kind of things, it looks like.
That resistance doesn't mean fighting against what you don't want.
That's
The
right.
resistance can be putting your energy, your love, and support into life-affirming ways of thinking and living of what you choose, so that the old ways become obsolete. They fall away. You don't have to fight.
And the moment there's so much a push to get aligned with the noise, but really resistance is a realignment with the signal, a different pathway of communication.
When we did some of the research into fluids that came from people from elsewhere, people who were killed by our military who were shooting down other craft, the material that came from them was not blood and hemoglobin. It really looked a lot more like plant material, like that they were existing directly from the energy of the sun.
Absolutely. There's a vector that comes out of this, it seems to me, that's where we redefine ourselves. The constraints that were an integral part of how you've been taught from your childhood kind of go away, you see. And so there's a marvelous kind of back end on all of this thing.
We're getting there much, much faster. The acceleration is pushing this kind of birthing canal.
We're in it, and the only way out of it now is to go through it. The very first line in the genetic code of all carbon-based life is exactly the same message. And it reads with the words, God eternal within the body. If our cosmic family have the same message, God eternal within the body, it suggests that as different as we are, we have a common heritage, and we are part of a common phenomenon in the cosmos, and that speaks volumes to the unity. As different as we may appear, that when you get down to the fundamental essence of our existence, that we all have this common heritage.
So thank you all for being with us, those of you who are viewing and with us, as well as the panel tonight. And thank you, and we'll look forward to next time. Now, if you like that little taste of our quartet session, I've got a special kind of offer for you, because we'd like to make it easy for you to be able to see the whole quartet, and not just a little trailer bit, but the whole thing. But we do this every 2 weeks, and it happens, and it's an hour long. And usually we make it only available to our paid subscribers. But we've got a special kind of offer that's available for those of you who are YouTube listeners and viewers. And if you would like to see and have access to the whole session of Quartet, all you have to do is go down below, and there is a code, a special code in there. And if you click on this and go and put in the special code, what we will do is give you a special kind of membership, just that will allow you to see the whole Quartet series and that's upcoming. And we'll send you announcements and tell you when the next ones come up, so it makes it easy for you to find it. But you got to make sure that you put in the code, because that'll make it free. Otherwise, it'll cost you money, and it's better when it's free anyway. So, but I'd encourage you to do that. So if you would like to see more Quartet, then just go down, put the code in, and we'll make sure you get it.